Hey, Janet,
Hi, Shane.
how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm so glad to have you join me. Thanks for agreeing to do this. I'm super psyched to have you with us and take this opportunity to just have a conversation together.
Well, thanks for having me. I love WEAG and I love your family and always happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, we love you too. And I'm, for those of you who don't know, Janet, she is the president of Virginia Kids Belong and the vice president of America Kids Belong. And I'm just here to have a conversation about Foster Care Awareness Month and what a great opportunity to raise awareness around the world for what's going on. But Janet, you and I have known each other for quite a long time. Actually, we met. Well, we maybe met before then, but we got to know each other on a missions trip together to New Orleans in 2007, I think. I think that's
Was
the year.
it
Um,
was
it was pretty awesome. And I really got to know you traveling from place to place to place and hearing your entire story. And whether
over
I
and
wanted to or
over and
not. No, I'm just,
over because there's nothing else to do in a van for 24 hours.
you know what, Emily, our friend Emily, refers to those van rides as you mean that time when I cried the entire time and Janet and I were basically taking turns crying, telling our stories.
Well, I'll just say this really quickly. I lived right by the church at the time and went there. And that's how we actually met, went to the church, went to the mission trip as a result. And right before that, in the gym at WEAG, this is going to come full circle, Shane. We're not even into foster care yet. And
Yeah, yeah.
God is already showing up. I prayed as a result of a sermon that you gave for God to break my heart for what breaks his. And I went on the mission trip the next month, and like I hadn't cried. I was a woman in politics for 20 years. Like, you don't cry. You have a very tough exterior. I didn't cry for 10 years. That trip was the first time I'd cried in 10 years. And I haven't stopped crying since then.
Well,
So
you did tell me that every time you come back into our church, it just starts to flow.
oh,
It just
it
kind of,
does.
it's like a physiological reaction that just starts happening.
I think it's like half physical now and mostly spiritual, but that was the domino that knocked all of those at that missions trip. So yeah,
Wow.
it was beautiful.
That is so cool. Thank you for telling me that, because that's just so meaningful to be there in that moment when God spoke to you to make a difference. And you mentioned politics. Um, you have a huge political background, and people don't know. Um,
It's probably good.
it, there, there's no bodies buried, nothing like that. But incredible things that you've accomplished politically. My son, who's in politics, as you know, uh, who would calls you a political beast. Now that's a compliment if you don't know
Oh,
what that is. Janet
it's
Kelly
a
is a
compliment.
political beast. And if you don't know why, anyone who can get a Republican governor elected in a landslide in Virginia is a political beast. Okay.
Mm.
So you
He's
did,
the
that's
last one.
amazing.
He's the last one, and it was a team effort. I cannot take credit, but thank you, Bruce. That's very kind.
Yeah. Bruce knows what he's talking about. And he says you are a beast
Mm.
and yet you used all of that and leveraged it, and everything that God has done in your life, you've leveraged towards this direction of helping children around the world, helping orphans, helping children be adopted, helping them be fostered. But I know that didn't just happen all of a sudden. That God, just like He sent you on that missions trip in spoke to you in a sermon and then started a whole series of reactions. I know there's a story behind this passion that God put in your heart. So tell us a little bit about your story, and where did the passion show up and
Mm.
begin to leverage, totally pivot your whole life, really, and your whole career?
Well, pivot is a great word, but honestly, Shane, it did start at WEAG with that prayer, and that was sort of, if I could point back to several points, that was one of the big turning points, because on that trip, the family that we ministered to, they were just so vulnerable. They were this older couple, if you recall, had a lot of health issues, and it really, there was something that happened on that trip that just gave me so much empathy for them. They didn't have a place to belong, or the place that they had belonged it needed redeeming. And we were part of that redemption. We rebuilt their home, and they got to go back to their sense of place and their sense of belonging. And if I'm looking back, like that was sort of one of those steps. And so, again,
Wow.
providentially end up running into a woman on the sidewalk at a mall outside of Chick-fil-A a few years later. It was about 3 years later. She was pregnant. There's a very long version. I'm going to give you the short version.
That's okay. We're just having a conversation and hanging out. So I'm okay with any version, Janet. And plus, P.S., I know that neither of us know what it is to give a short version of anything. So.
I know. You should not tell me to give the long version of anything, because I will.
So let's start with the short.
Let's start short, and then you can ask follow-up questions about that. So, meet this woman on the sidewalk at the mall, Willow Lawn Chick-fil-A, the old Chick-fil-A, not the new one.
The old one, yeah.
And it's still there. And she, just a really tough life this girl had. Ended up at the crisis pregnancy center with her that same day. Keep in mind, I had just been sworn in as Secretary of the Commonwealth. So I don't have time to be following random strangers around to crisis pregnancy centers, or at least I didn't think I did. But we became friends, and she was the one who really gave me my education, along with this couple in New Orleans and several other people that God had put in my path, on what exactly grace and redemption and sort of second chances look like. And I had no idea, I didn't grow up wealthy by any means, but I had no idea the depth of sort of poverty and dysfunction that existed right here in our city until I had gotten involved in this situation. And fast forward 2 years, Ryan and I got married, and we got a call. Actually, it was May 17th. When we got this legal custody of this little boy. They called and said, hey, we know you guys just got married, but would you, we know you have a special relationship with this family, this woman, she was pregnant, you met her, this little boy was born healthy. They started coming to, our church even at that point. And would you be willing to take custody of him? And I'm like, no, there is no way this makes any sense. This is not wise. Anybody that we would have asked would have said, this is not wise, right?
Well, and just considering your job, your position, what God had in front of you at that time, starting a family, it was just like, yeah, it's overwhelming for anybody considering that. It wasn't, right. I'm sure, and you already had a heart for this. It wasn't like that. It was just like overwhelming. I can't imagine.
It was just too much. It's one thing to be an advocate in this space. It's another thing. And I wasn't yet an advocate, to be clear. I had worked on the issues tangentially, but I was not an advocate yet. But I would, if you, Shane, and Sue had come to me 3 weeks after your wedding and said, and when you worked in the governor's office, and said, hey, we've just randomly met this woman whose son is now available for fostering. Do you think it's smart? I would have been like, dude, you really need to think, like, this is not.
Yeah.
But my husband is a saint, and he just said, Janet, you got to look at the story that God's trying to tell here. It's like, okay. So he said yes. Wow. And we got custody of Ashton. A few days later, he's now our son.
Wow.
He's, great kid. That got us, though, personal window into the foster care system. Realized there's 1,000 kids at this point waiting for adoptive homes in Virginia. Realized that Virginia's 50th at that point in permanency, meaning we did the worst job of any state in the country. We're now 47th. We've moved up 3 spots. Woohoo!
Good job, Janet.
Not good enough, apparently, but we did the worst job at that time of getting kids into families before they aged out. So in Virginia, 500 kids age out every single year. And it costs taxpayers $300,000 over those kids' lifetimes when they age out. And so then you just start rewinding. Well, why? Well, why? Well, why? Well, why? And you eventually get to, the system is broken. And every foster care system is broken. It's just not Virginia's.
Yeah.
It's broken because you're dealing with brokenness. Like a system that deals with this kind of stuff is going to be extremely difficult to work in anyway. And just heard about the huge lack of foster families. And it just hit me like, at the time there were 3,000 kids. Opioid epidemic, now there's 5,400 kids in foster care. So it's grown significantly since 2012 when we first learned about this. But at the time, there were 3,000 kids in care, and I just thought, 3,000? That's manageable. Like, that's doable. I've worked on a lot of issues in the governor's office. Hunger. Like, there's always going to be hungry people. There's always going to be the poor, as Jesus says. But man, we can solve this. And I knew as a person of faith that the church was the answer. But I didn't have a real clear picture on that. So Ryan, to tell the short version, back to the short version, Shane. Ryan and I end up running
good stuff right here.
Ryan and I end up running a campaign in the governor's office called Virginia Adopts Campaign for 1,000. Short rabbit trail. Ryan left for drill right after we got custody of Ashton. He was in the National Guard 3 weeks. We had just found out we were pregnant. So like governor's cabinet, newly married, new foster mom, newly pregnant, morning sickness, and it was busy season at work. Like being an accountant in April, there was a busy season, and it was right then all this stuff happened. Right after that, Governor McDonnell called me in his office and Ryan and just said, "Hey, we're really worried about you guys." AKA everyone's talking about you.
Your whole entire staff has turned against you and turned you into the governor. So
no, it was more like above me, not below me. The below me staff were like solid. They had my back in way. Like you have never, I could tell you so many stories. It was everybody else that was just kind of watching this happen. And keep in mind, when you're in politics, it really is family. It's kind of like a church, like it's family. And so it really wasn't selling me out so much as it was like, no, we're real concerned. Like Janet's at a breaking point. Like something's got to give. So he calls us in his office and says, look, in the nicest, most fatherly way possible, everybody's worried about you. Are you sure this is the right thing? Are you sure this is wise? And I just said, I don't care if it's wise, because I just heard from a pastor here in town how horrible the foster care system is, and I'm not going to let Ashton in there. I'm just not going to do it. And there's 1,000 kids waiting to be adopted. Our system's one of the worst in the country for that. And I'm just not going to have him be I can't have that on my conscience to have him be a statistic. And I said, by the way, these kids are wards of the state, which means you're their dad. And fortunately, I'd worked for the man for 15 years at that point, and he knows me well enough I could say
just your daddy, McDonnell.
Yeah, I can say he is my second dad. I mean, he really professionally is a huge mentor. So I got away with it. But that was the flipping point. He was like, we have to fix this. Let us run this campaign, and got 1,041 kids matched with Loving Homes that last year of the administration. Only by the grace of God. And if you followed politics during that time, you'll recall he was in the middle of a really bad scandal. Yeah. And to this day says, providentially, this never would have gotten the billing that it got if I hadn't been in that place, because I knew it was important. And so so many just total God things. He says it was one of the best things he did as governor, and, would like to do it all over again. That piece of being governor again, because it was so fulfilling. So that's the short version.
Well, and it goes to show you too, regardless of what happens in people's careers and everything else, that the legacy that you leave behind is the stuff that's of the kingdom of God. That's the only kind that lasts.
Amen to that.
And talk about a huge career pivot. You then begin to get involved and build a relationship with America Kids Belong. You start Virginia Kids Belong. You are a champion for fostering and adopting, and your approach is so awesome. And I know you've learned it, and it's come from other people, and a lot of great people who've gone before you and gone before all of us, to talk about businesses, churches, and the system coming, the government coming together, that none of us can do this alone, but all of us can partner. And it's like you're getting people to partner with God on his mission a little bit. It's really cool.
Yeah, well, anytime you're working on vulnerable kids, you're exactly right. And you just did a great commercial, by the way, for VKB. Thanks. I should hire you. So yeah, we do unite those three spheres. I mean, if you think those are the biggest institutions, there's really not a whole lot outside that except nonprofits, and that's what we are. So, if you get faith, government, business community all working together in the best interests of kids, rowing in the same direction at the same time, we've seen some really powerful movements happen in other states with America's Kids Belong, Oklahoma, Tennessee. So I am motivated by things that work. I hope I put myself out of business by solving this crisis. Like, that's my goal. Churches can't think that way. You always want, but I really hope Virginia's Kids Belong isn't needed in 5 years, because so many people in the community have stepped forward.
I love that. And, I think, me as a pastor and Weston Assembly of God really well, that politics don't find our platform. And our platform doesn't intermingle with politics. But, we're in a global pandemic right now as a world, as a country. This hit us hard. It shut everything down. And we began to take an approach of reaching out to government and saying, how can we come alongside, because of a need? How can we help? How can we help meet it? And we put ourselves on every call list, and Henrico County and Richmond City, and gotten retirement communities and first responders, and just began to serve our community. And I think this is similar, this pandemic that we're in right now, you could argue that we've been in an orphan crisis, a pandemic, for a really long time. And for you and people like you to show up and remind all of us that something's bigger than your position in government, something's bigger than your church, something's bigger than your business, and call us, that's kingdom. That's the kingdom of God, is praying his kingdom come, his will be done. We fight for that. But I want to ask you specifically about the crisis we're in.
Sure.
Because I run on that rabbit trail because I think it's so relevant to how we're responding in this crisis. But if you go into this pandemic already a part of one, if you go into a crisis with a crisis that already existed, and then you add another crisis on top of it, it has a huge impact. What is COVID-19's impact on families that are adopting, families that are fostering, on the foster kids themselves, on the system itself? What are some of those impacts?
Well, that's a great question. And what we've done a lot of this spring, Shane, is just spread the word that, the health implications of the virus are obviously forefront of everybody's mind. I mean, they have to be. Very serious disease, all of that. And of course, then the second hit is the economy. That's on everybody's mind. Is my favorite coffee shop going to be open? Do I have a job? Like, do I, can I pay my bills? There are a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. But in that third slot, of course, in the government sphere, if you get in the third slot, you're golden. You got to be one of the top three to get attention, to get funding. And so really fighting for kids to be in that third slot, whether that's the education system, which parents are all too familiar with how that's being impacted.
How's your education system going at home?
Oh, yeah, it's not pretty over here at the Kelly house. I'm not going to lie. Got a lot of work to make up for this summer. But the child welfare, so if it's education or child welfare that kids deserve, it has impacted kids. The virus doesn't affect kids. Well, it does affect kids. It just doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect them in their lungs. It affects them in many, many, many other ways. And the biggest impact, of course, is to kids who are in unsafe homes already. think about just a stereotypical struggling household. You add a global pandemic on top of that. You add not being able to go to school on top of that. You add financial stress, emotional stress on top of that. And, anybody, and I know that there are people in church who grew up in volatile households. I mean, think about what that must be like for those kids. And so they're not going to school, where if an incident does happen, we did some research. This is really sobering and I won't spend too much time on it, but we did some research about a month ago that we typed it and did some Google Trends research, and realized that the phrase, my mom hit me and my dad hit me, spiked in April. So the foster care crisis is not getting any better because of COVID, is the short way to say it. We expect something called the October flood. Always happens every year. But unfortunately, this year it's going to be a lot worse. So that's why we need to get people in the door. We've been trying to work with agencies, private agencies and government agencies, to say, can you move your training up now while everybody's stuck at home? And the system is not exactly equipped to do that, to be honest. So a lot of the trainings, which take 6 to 8 weeks, which we'll talk about it a little bit later on, what that exactly looks like. But a lot of those aren't happening. Not as many as I would like to happen aren't happening right now, but there's still plenty of ways that people can get ready. So we'll talk about that later, I think.
Okay. Well, we can talk about it anytime you want. I love that. There's ways for us to come alongside and help, specifically in the crisis we're in now. But back up, I want us to talk about how we can help right now in this specific context. But back up, you said October flood. Clue us in, those that aren't in the biz here.
Sure. No, thank you for catching that. So teachers are number one mandated reporters. They're the number one way that child abuse and neglect gets reported. So when kids, thank you for that's a very important point. When kids go back to school in September, they notice the signs of abuse. They notice the signs of neglect. And of course, abuse is what gets the most, like, oh, who could hit a kid? Who could hurt a kid? But really, neglect is 70% of kids enter because of neglect. So really, it's the neglect piece that is even more prevalent than abuse. Teachers will notice that and report, call DSS. If you have teachers in your church, they've probably done this. It's a very obviously sobering experience. And those investigations result in either a warranted, yes, this child needs, this birth family needs support. That's the posture of the birth family. It's not judgment so much anymore, which is great. That actually gets us into what we can do to help. This birth family needs support. They need stability. They need health. How do we get this birth family stable, safe, and healthy so that the kids can return home? That's the goal of foster care, is to really make that God's plan A, this whole family whole, right, first. So if that isn't possible in that moment, the kid will go into foster care. Sibling sets more accurately and more often into foster care for a season, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, until this family's healthy. And then the kids can go back to the birth family. So that's kind of how it works.
Wow. And I can't even imagine. I know as a pastor, as coming alongside helping families in crisis, that people are overwhelmed and broken people are raising broken people. And the crisis at home just got worse, as you mentioned, because there is now those broken people are supposed to be helping them in school and helping them do all these things. None of that's happening. It's not happening in good homes, right? It's not,
even the strongest homes are struggling right now. And if they tell you any differently, tell me, because I will send my kids to their house.
Please. Okay. If you post one more thing about your kids sitting down at the table and reading things, that is propaganda. So, but how can we help those families struggling right now? Janet, what would you say to us average Joes out there? What do we do?
Sure. And thank you for asking that. I think it's such indicative of WEAG's heart too, because this is obviously not the first time I've heard you ask this question. So let me paint a little bit of a picture for you, a word picture for you. Foster care is, to use the word upstream, foster care, if you picture it as a river, Virginia's Kids Belong focuses on parts of the river. And then other organizations focus more upstream. So let me just give me a minute to get through this. So picture a river with a waterfall that like just drops off. Kids who have aged out of the system have dropped off the waterfall and are drowning. I mean, those kids. So when in our own communities, there are kids who are over the age of 18. 18 to 21-year-olds are in independent living programs in Virginia. Thank goodness we have that. So at least they're not completely dropped off. The ones that qualify are in those homes. But if you know of any kids who have aged out, we've had kids, we have kids right now that we know of that don't really have a safe place to go, the older youth that don't have a safe place to go. And so we put an APB on our Facebook. We need a family for a kid. They're in a hotel room. They can't stay. That's not sustainable. That's not okay for a 19-year-old to be in a hotel room by herself. So can we get a family? We were able to make that happen, which was great. And then just kind of working backwards, you have social workers who are in that river who are really struggling. So anything you can do to show social workers love is always good. I think the city of Richmond last month, well, you guys did it, didn't you?
We did. Well, you hooked us up with none other than the person that we got to help was a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I'm just saying. You knew my heart. So
I saw that on the list and I was like, this isn't my girl. This is Shane and Sue's girl. I need to give.
Well, we were super, super psyched to be able to jump in on that part of the river, especially with not just because of the Eagles, but I think, how can anyone say no to this? This is tell them how simple this was.
So we did the city of Richmond. We've got faith networks, which I want to talk about too, because you guys really were there from the very beginning, and it's becoming it's getting national attention what happened in Henrico County. So I don't know that it was on any list for us to talk about today, but I want to talk about that because it's amazing. So Richmond City, we've got some faith network of churches in Richmond, Henrico, Hanover, Chesterfield, and more localities. Richmond City, and Henrico will do this later, so you haven't missed anything. Richmond City coordinated care packages for social workers. They asked them what their favorite things were, and just went to Target or ordered it offline, and it was beautiful. It was easy. They all coordinated. They dropped them off, and everybody's happy. The reason that that's important, this is sometimes it's like, okay, mine like ginger ale. I'm like, really? Like, what good is ginger ale? But 75% of social workers suffer from PTSD, vicarious trauma, watching this hard stuff happen. That means that they quit sooner than they should, which means, and there's some data done that if there was a study done that if a child maintains the same social worker throughout the life of their file, they have a 90% chance of getting in an adoptive family. If the social worker leaves in the middle, it drops to well below 50%. So it's really, yes, it is about the social worker. And yes, they are people in their own right. And yes, we should be supporting them. But it really has that trickle down effect to the actual kids and outcomes for those kids too. So that's why we love on social workers. And I can keep working upstream if you want.
No, I that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. So social workers, what's the next one?
And then there are, you can actually foster or adopt by pulling those kids kind of out of the river. I don't like the rescue language or the white savior language, so just work with me. It's a word picture. It's not a perfect metaphor.
Yeah.
But because really, and they're the ones that are rescuing us. I can talk more about that later. But man, it's just such a joke thinking that I'm the one that's helping Ash. Everything is reversed in the kingdom. So you can be foster or adopt. You can wrap around a foster adoptive family. Let me just stop right there for a minute and tell you that, again, even the strongest families are struggling. If you know a foster adoptive family, they are notorious, and I'm saying this because I am one, notoriously bad at asking for help. Don't ask them, what can I do for you? Show up with a gift card, show up and mow their lawn. Don't ask them, just do it, because they'll be like, no, we got this. We're good. Well, they might be good, but they're not great, and they're probably not even good. So just do it. And the thing that I love about your church is that this is sort of instilled from the outset. When you do recruiting events at your church for foster families, you tell them, do not do this without a wraparound team. So this is not meant to be done alone. You're meant to ask for help. So that is
and it's where the majority of us fall, right? Because we're so many people are in different situations. They may not fall in any category close to being able to adopt or foster, but everyone can do something. You've taught us that, and we've taught our people that. I'm wearing my intertwined hat
I love it.
today with my product placement. And Rush Middleton, our own Rush Middleton, who's amazing, who's just leading this ministry in our church. He's just a family guy who's adopted and fostered himself, but he says it all the time. You can't do everything, but everyone can do something. And but for those who might be thinking, well, there's no way I could ever adopt or foster. So what's the perfect adoption candidate? You should adopt. Oh, you should foster. For those who are listening to our conversation right now, what's that ideal?
Really and truly, anybody that has time in their schedule and room in their heart and room in their home. That's it. You can be, I'm not even sure this is okay, but technically you can be 18 years old and become a foster parent in Virginia. There are foster parents who are as old as 80, as long as they can. So there's no real age prohibition. And beyond that, you don't have to be married. In fact, we're going to be targeting singles this summer to foster, because every family I know is tired of their own kids. They're not real interested in bringing even more children into their home. I hope that's not the case. But the folks that I've talked to the last month or so during this pandemic, the ones that are most excited about fostering are all single. And that's amazing. So you can be single. You don't have to own a home. They don't have to have their own bedroom. They can share with another kid of the same gender. I would say you have to be willing to ask for help, and you need to become trauma informed. Those are the two that I would add in there. Those would be my ideal, and doesn't wear rose-colored glasses.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that too, because it was a total softball question here, to set you up to say, man, everyone ought to consider this. And so I'm going to say that everyone ought to consider it. I pray through this every year. I don't know, my kids are old now, and I think, I'm too old to be a dad again, but everyone needs to pray through and consider that possibility. But I just got done teaching this at church. It's like, I'm so grateful that Jesus is not you don't find out about the fine print in kingdom life later on. He tells you up front. So there's a cost to stepping up, and people should know the realities. I don't like rose-colored glasses that you just said, and that's what I want to ask you to talk a little more about, because I'd love for you to tell us, what are some of the realities? Tell me up front, how hard is this? And I know God can do that work in preparing me and preparing those who might be watching in on our conversation. But tell us the fine print up front. Tell us the messy. Tell us the struggle. What does that look like?
Yeah, that is, talk about a long story. The closest thing that I can compare it to, and for married people, they're going to get this intrinsically. For single people, just imagine, it really is a lot. The parallels as far as the messy are a lot like marriage. When you're walking down the aisle, you're like, I love this person. I'm committed to this person. You're hopeful, you are excited, anticipation, you go in that honeymoon period, and you're like, best decision I ever made. And then the selfishness starts to creep in, and you're like, ooh, wow, didn't see that coming. And there are just a lot of those moments when you're fostering, they're like, oh, wow, didn't see that coming. So
why did we do this again?
Yeah, it really is. And that's why it's all of the same things you think. And I have an amazing husband, so I might not think them as often as the next person.
No, Ryan is perfect. So.
He is as close
basically
to perfect
Mary
as
Poppins and Ryan. So
he is as close to perfect as they come. But it's still, man, it is tough. Marriage is hard. It's the same. Literally, just take everything that you have said over being, for singles, what's the hardest but most worthwhile thing you've ever done? Have you run a marathon? Have you, served in the military? Whatever it is that is, you would look back and be like, if I would have known then what I know now, I wouldn't have done it, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
That
And
is it.
partly why, and the why behind you doing it, what pulls you into this massive marathon or Ironman more than the marathon, the most grueling challenge, ultra marathon, and most life-changing daily crisis, up at dawn, up at night, working and praying and working and praying and getting help and asking for help and not having all the answers. There's got to be a really big why behind it. And I'm wondering, I know that's the description of a reality for foster caring or adopting parents who are adopting, but tell us a little bit about the realities of that foster kid.
Well, I think COVID, if you really think about it, should be increasing our empathy for children in foster care. We've all known what it's like to feel blindsided by external events that we had nothing to do with, that were not our fault, but we're still suffering the consequences.
And we're not even at WEAG.
Well, you knew it was going to happen. And like, when I started talking about these kids, like, I live 2 blocks from Chamberlain. Like, they're right there, you know, they're this way too. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not just this side of town. But, you know, we've all experienced the, you know, some families, you know, are we going to have enough to eat? Are we going to be okay? Are we, you know, just this utter and complete loss of control. And, you know, that's the result of the event, the traumatic event. Like, something had to happen, you know, in order for that kid to be removed. That in and of itself is bad enough, you know, that one-time event, but it's everything that comes after that. Hey, pack your stuff up in a trash bag. We're out. We've got to go. You know, everything you own. It's dehumanizing. It's identity shaking. It is just at their very core, what these kids go through. And, you know, I always say, oh, kids are resilient. They are. But there's another book called The Body Keeps Score, and it does. And so they're just internalizing all of this stuff, and it's coming out in anger and rage, and later, if it's not dealt with, which is why these healing homes are so important. We want to get healing positive influences into these kids' lives, whether they go back home or not. Hopefully they are. Hopefully those parents also get healthy and stable. But you got to get healthy, positive influence into these kids' lives sooner, so that healing happens and that trauma is diminished and healed, so that they don't end up, you know, we've talked about a school to prison pipeline. The foster care to prison pipeline is even less curvy and more straight. So, you know, we've got to get these healing influences into these kids' lives sooner. That's just the bottom line, because there is so much of that trauma that they go through.
You know, Janet, one of the things I love that you do and your organization does is puts those kids in front of us. How does someone get connected to, I mean, without fostering, adopting, but how do we meet, and where can we meet? You know, I don't have a podcast, I don't have show notes, but y'all get ready to write something down. Okay. Old school, get your paper and pen out, or get your computer out and type this in, whatever the address is. But tell us how we can connect to some of these kids and meet them.
Sure. There's several ways. The fastest way during COVID to do it is to go on our website at vakidsbelong.org. And you can click on Meet the Kids, and they're there. Shane, I'll just warn you, there's a kid on there that's a Philadelphia Eagles fan.
I know. I've seen him.
Malik. Yeah.
I've seen Malik. I know. I have.
He is we videoed him in January.
Yeah.
Of last year. and he still doesn't have a home, which is very rare.
We need to get Malik to come over and watch some games with us
There you go.
Yeah. Are we allowed to do that? Can people help? Okay.
Well, you've got a background check because you're a pastor, so they might make, but typically, no, they want the lasting relationships, and introducing too many people is probably not great and all that stuff. There's a lot of red tape, but we'll figure it out.
Can someone build a relationship with these kids without becoming adoption or
Yes.
fostering?
So here's two other ways. And I do want to spend a minute to talk about Intertwine and Rush, because you guys have built one of the best foster care ministries really in the country.
Rush is amazing. He is. That man is on a mission. Yeah. He and Jennifer are on a mission.
Yes, they are. I don't know when they sleep, because
I don't think
I call him, he picks up the phone, even if he worked the whole night.
Yeah.
Like, do you ever actually sleep?
Yeah.
So the thing that I love, let me give you a little background, and then I'll tell you how you can meet the kids. Just don't let me forget. So about 3 years ago, when VKB first got started, a bunch of churches, actually not a bunch, it's a bunch now, 3 churches. It was Hope, Third, and WEAG. Went and started meeting with Henrico DSS monthly. They gave us an hour a month. We would all meet ahead of time. We'd all get our agenda together. And that has resulted in one of the strongest faith government partnerships that I've seen anywhere. They trust us. We've been to DC I've been to DC with Henrico County social workers to talk about what happened. And she says, I trust them. I know that these people love these kids just as much as I do. And that was not our experience before these churches came forward. We always felt like we were going to be let down. We always felt like we couldn't ask because they weren't going to deliver. We always felt like they would quit when it got hard. And that's not the case with these churches. And so like it is, I mean, I put my reputation online because that was our agency. So I was like, you can trust these people. So if they hadn't shown up, like it would have been really bad, but they did. They so did. And it's just been now I don't even go to the meetings anymore. It's just taken on a life of its own. And Rush and Jen, I just cannot say enough good things. So,
well, and they have a whole team of people who are with them too. And they're just committed, amazing people. And not all of them on that team are foster parents or adopted parents. So I think this could just another way, if you're involved in a church and you're, get them connected to Virginia Kids Belong, get them partnered for sure. But when you talk about connecting to kids and talk about, how we can connect, how we can help.
So here's let me that's the second and third way. Rush coordinates events called Foster Parents Nights Out. You guys have hosted them at WEAG before. Obviously, COVID is going to change those. But the next time you hear of a Foster Parents Night Out, sign up, because you get to meet the kids. You get to interact with them. You get to talk to them. You get to play with them for 3 hours. Their parents get a break. As a foster parent, adoptive parent, it is life-giving. I've had people come up to me at these events and take me by the shoulders and say, you have no idea how much our marriage needed this. We haven't had a date night in 6 months or 6 years, like that kind of, it is just like tears, the whole bit. So it's great for the parents. It's great for the kids because they get to play, and it's great for people in your church because they get to really, and you hear all the stuff, man, these kids are amazing. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're not bad kids. They've had bad things happen to them, but they're not bad kids, and so it just has a way of sort of demystifying them and demythifying them. Like a lot of people, they think foster kids, they're like, there's some harsh words that come out when you hear that moniker. I don't even like to call them foster kids. I call them children in foster care, just so I'm not labeling them in some weird way. It's a little nuanced and sneaky, but for me, that's how I feel like I can honor them a little bit better. And showing up and seeing those kids at those Foster Parents Nights Out are amazing. The third way that you can help, and this is, I'll just send people right back to Rush, are, again, COVID affected, it's what's called respite care. It's basically babysitting for children in foster care or for their families. And so, we've had Ashton for 6 years, and we have, not during COVID, unfortunately, but weekly respite. We have a couple that takes Ashton every weekend for 4 hours for us. And we know that is when we can breathe. That's when we, connect with each other, connect with our two other daughters, connect with them. We schedule a one-on-one time, and it's just like he gets his like love from another family. It's beautiful. So
Wow.
I will tell you, again, we're terrible at asking for help. Every foster family needs that. And now that the world is opening back up, there will be opportunities for that kind of thing to happen, where you can take them to the park, take them on a hike, take them to a safe place, wear masks, all of the caveats, stay 6 feet apart, whatever. But just signing up to, it's called respite babysitting.
I love that. And, I think what an opportunity for people to be able to mentor and help. And, you can't just walk up to a child in foster care or a teenager in foster care and say, hey, let me mentor you. But you get to build a relationship through the fostering families and build relationship and trust. What does that look like? Do you have some picture examples of like, okay, so I go build this relationship with parents who are fostering perhaps, I know it's difficult to go direct. You told us how we can do that, and parents' night out, or even just connecting with kids directly. But what does it look like then to come alongside that family? Do you see kind of those mentoring relationships begin to happen? I know for me, my example is with kids of divorce, because that was me growing up. And if I didn't have great examples in front of me of what family looked like and other people, I had to go outside of that. And my mom did a great job of putting people in front of me. I struggled my whole life with that. And so I look at kids who lost their dads or lost a parent, or kids of divorce. And a huge part of my heart goes out to, I want to help, but I need to build a relationship. I need to go through those steps. What does it look like in this scenario? Do you see that kind of thing happening and that opportunity there for people?
Yes, we do. And we actually have an official program. Again, I'm not sure how COVID is going to impact it. We haven't sorted all that out yet, but for kids who are older, we started it with 18 to 21 crowd, and we're going to try to lower it to kids, because the county asked us to kids who are 16, 17, 18, that the prospects for them to get a family just go down every day they get older. I am such a fighter for actual families. It's really hard I feel like I'm settling by getting them a mentor, to be honest. I'm like, if I have an hour a day, I'm going to fight for you to get a family, not a mentor. So yeah, just so like there's just this tension there for me, just programmatically in the organization on what to prioritize. But there's no reason we can't do both. I can fight for their family while I find them a mentor. It's just more of a programmatic logistical thing. But for the 18 to 21-year-olds, we do have a program called Life Guide. Several members at WEAG are life guides, and you commit to an hour a week with a kid who's aged out. And we've seen some amazing things happen from that program. We've also seen when you're on a wraparound team for a foster family, I mean, some of those wraparound members have ended up adopting the kid in foster care because the foster family just signed up to foster. They were fighting for reunification, and it didn't happen, but they were not in a position to adopt. That's not why they got into fostering. A lot of people in the church come that, well, we feel called to adopt. And I'm like, could you also feel called to foster? Because we really need foster families, not adopted families. It's amazing. A lot of people feel called to adopt. And I'm like, God, could you please like speak a little louder on the fostering?
Well, good. This is Foster Care Awareness Month. So
yeah. That's what we really need is foster parents to fight for those reunification with the birth family. But if that doesn't happen, the foster family was like, we didn't get into this to adopt. But this couple over here really does want to grow their family through adoption. And so, yeah, I mean, there are so many stories, Shane. And, just by saying yes, I'll tell you real quick. When Ryan and I got back from our honeymoon, I was so grateful. We just had a great week. And it was the day before I sort of found out about this crisis at this foster care rally. I think you were there. Back in 2012, a bunch of churches came together at Grove Avenue Baptist Church and started talking about this. And so the day before that rally, I went to an exercise class, and I was just kind of zoning out there at the end. And I just said, God, I am so grateful. I've been so blessed in life. And I dangerous prayer, almost as dangerous as break my heart for what breaks yours. I just said, I will do anything you want. Well, 2 weeks later is when we got the confirmation. So maybe that's not a good thing to say, because he answered that so quickly and so profoundly. And a lot of people don't want that. I didn't want that either, to be honest. But the bottom line is just say yes. Just take that first step to do something. Just do something. And then, if God's pulling you toward it, I mean, yeah, it's scary, but it's also the safest place you can be if that's what he wants for you.
I love that verse. Delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. But the truth of that verse really isn't in getting what I want. The truth of that verse is
our desires.
How he changes our desires.
Yeah. And he did mine. He did mine. And, our life is not perfect by any stretch, but I cannot imagine, and so different from what I ever thought. But if I'm really honest, right now at this point in my life, I do have sort of everything that I wanted and dreamed of. But I wouldn't have gotten there if I had kind of taken the easy way.
Have you seen that play out in other families too, as they begin to foster and maybe even adopt? Have you seen that? What kind of impact has it had on them? Has it had on the family? When I begin to foster kids, what kind of impact are you seeing in the families or the people who do this?
That's a great question. So the number one question that potential foster families have for us is always, how is this going to impact my bio kids? Always. So I'll start there and then I'll talk about the adults. I don't know first of all, look at Jeremy freaking Waltz in your church. Does it get any better than that? And Jamie, hello, if you did that and you get Jamie and Jeremy Waltz, there's exhibit A.
It's an amazing story. And Jeremy, if you don't know, is a pastor in our church, and his sister are just a massive volunteer, and the Waltz family are just an incredible family who fostered many times and have a great story. That's a great illustration. Yeah.
I mean, really and truly, it just doesn't get much better than that. My own kids would tell you that, they wouldn't have it any other way. It's the best.
Well, what about you? What is it? What would you...
Okay. Well, so we'll pass the bio kids. I call it fast track sanctification, and I've got a long way to go. I started in a negative, so it's not like I'm a great human and have just grown so much. I needed it. Again, I'll just use the marriage analogy. Think of how much better most people are if they have a decently healthy marriage, or a strong friendship. Have you met people that, even though they were hard, or maybe, it may not have been easy, but they still taught you valuable things. And that's what it's like. I mean, it's nothing easy is worthwhile, and most hard things can be if you're supposed to be doing them. So that's what it's like. I mean, it really, those first few years were, I never got up in the morning when I was in politics, even though I was helping to run a state, and had the same amount of desperation that I have now. I mean, not even close. Not even close. Should have. The reality was I was just as desperate then. I just didn't feel it. Now I am acutely aware of it on an hourly basis, sometimes more often, that I'm not self-sufficient. I can't do this alone. It's another pastor, foster dad that I know called it manna. You are daily, and what gift are you going to send me today that shows me your presence? Yeah. And that's just how you live. And that's how most foster parents, if they're people of faith, I don't know how people of faith live anyway. I certainly don't know how people who aren't people of faith, I don't know how they foster, because I just couldn't do it without having that anchor of my soul. I don't know how they do it.
Wow. Janet, you're amazing. And I think most people wouldn't sign up for this to say, yeah, I want to be desperate.
That's a good point. Maybe I should change my sales.
But I want you to talk. Let's end with this. What impact has that had in you personally? How did it change you to live that daily bread, and your kids? your bio kids that you already had your daughter who's amazing, and she's been with you, and she's gone through all of this too. What How did it transform you to go through this kind of desperation?
Mm. I think the best way to say it is that, certainly compared to my old life, and politics may not be a good comparison because it's a rough business, but
Hmm.
um, there is there's a joy and a peace and a contentment that we have as a family and as individuals that I just don't, certainly never experienced that before getting into this space. There is there's an acute awareness of what is actually important. Like before I would really sweat the small stuff, and I still do. I mean, I'm, a little anal-retentive when it comes to keeping a clean house and like why bother right now, like that kind of stuff. But what really matters, I mean, our car is 13 years old. Who cares? Our house is not huge. I don't care. We don't go on fancy vacations. Who cares? It just realigns my affections. It's realigned my affections.
It sounds like a freedom you're
Oh,
describing.
that's a really good word. I would not have used that word, but yeah, I don't think you get that level of contentment and sort of that shalom that scripture talks about, that level of peace, without that freedom. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think also the beautiful thing about the freedom word is that there's really not we live life with a fearlessness that I think we're not as easily intimidated by just like the problems of life, because they're kind of prevalent so often. There are struggles and it's seasons. Like there are some months, years that are blissful and amazing and perfect. I don't want to focus on the bad stuff. It's just like marriage. I keep going back to that. Like it's amazing. And there are moments when it's just like, oh, my heart, like, there's been one moment every single day this week where I was just bursting with just pride at this kid who is like fighting for himself and his identity and who he is. And it's just beautiful. But I think I had a really easy life in some ways before, and I thought I was happy, and this just level of happiness and joy, and I also know I'm doing what God's called me to do. So I think that there's something like the meaning, the purpose, the significance, like all of that kind of rolls into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I haven't really articulated that before. Sorry, it took me a while.
I love it. I love that, and I love being able to watch you over the years, Janet. You and Ryan, how you've handled this with incredible grace. I've stepped into so many challenges and watched that change me. And I think people sometimes are worried or scared, fearful. We didn't pick COVID-19. That challenge picked us. This is a challenge you have to choose. And it's important for us to hear, for all of us to hear, not just in saying, hey, May is Foster Care Awareness Month, but every month ought to be a time when I'm willing to pray about and say, God, what challenge should I choose? Rather than just letting everything that is hard choose me. If I choose something hard, what could you do with that? And I've watched your family do this with incredible grace in tackling this tension and making a difference. And I appreciate the difference you're making, not just in the Commonwealth, but in our country and on this issue. Your life has already had such a huge impact to bring his kingdom into play right here in Richmond, Virginia. And I appreciate your ministry in our church. And I know in every church and every organization, every business, every child that you've already impacted. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I've already said what a big fan I am of WEAG. That's very kind, Shane. And I mean, WEAG is all threaded all throughout this story. So we love you guys, and we're so grateful. Please keep up the good work. Do whatever you guys can to support that Intertwine ministry, and Godspeed to you and Sue and your team. We've got a great one, and just
Amen.
wishing and praying for great things for WEAG into the future.
Amen. Well, it's an honor to be partnered with you in ministry, officially and in friendship, and in the kingdom of God to be partnered together. I love it. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.